When Elvis Presley stopped singing in the middle of his Las Vegas concert, nobody knew what was happening. 3,000 people watched in confusion as the king of rock and roll pointed to a 12-year-old girl in the audience, a girl with red braids and a homemade t-shirt who'd traveled all the way from Alaska. "Come on up here, honey," Elvis said with his famous smile. The girl's name was Marigold Bennett, and she was shaking so badly she could barely walk. But she had something important to tell Elvis. Something she'd promised her family she would say. Something that had taken every penny she could save and 2 months of hard work to make possible. When Marigold finally reached the stage and stood next to Elvis under those bright lights, he knelt down to her level. His kind eyes looked right into hers. "You want to tell me something?" he asked gently. "I can see you've got something on your mind." Marigold leaned close and whispered words that only Elvis could hear. And what she said made the most famous man in the world break down and cry real tears in front of everyone. But to understand why those words affected Elvis so deeply, we need to go back. Back to a tiny town in Alaska where Marigold's story really begins. Back to where a young girl learned that music could save you when you thought nothing else could. This is the story of how one moment of courage changed 2 lives forever. The air inside the Las Vegas Hilton sparkled with electricity on the night of August 15, 1974. 3,000 people packed into the showroom, their voices rising in waves of excitement. Women clutched programs against their chests. Men adjusted their ties nervously. Children bounced in their seats, unable to contain their energy. They were all waiting for him. When the lights finally dimmed, a collective gasp swept through the room. The orchestra began to play. Then, stepping into the spotlight like he owned the very concept of stardom, came Elvis Presley. He wore a white jumpsuit that caught every beam of light, sending sparkles dancing across the walls. His black hair was perfectly styled. His smile was bright and confident. The crowd erupted into screams, so loud they seemed to shake the chandeliers. Elvis grabbed the microphone and began to sing. His voice filled every corner of that enormous room, smooth and powerful. Women threw roses onto the stage. Flashbulbs popped like stars exploding. For the next hour, Elvis commanded that stage like nobody else could. But something was different tonight, though the audience couldn't quite name it. There was a heaviness behind Elvis's smile, a sadness hiding in his eyes between songs. If you looked closely enough, you could see a man going through the motions, painting on joy while carrying something much heavier underneath. Midway through the concert, Elvis began singing one of his most famous ballads. His voice softened, becoming tender and sweet. The audience swayed, holding up lighters and matches that flickered like fireflies in the darkness. Then Elvis stopped singing. The orchestra continued for a few more notes before trailing off into confused silence. The audience murmured, wondering if something was wrong. Elvis stood at the center of the stage, shielding his eyes from the spotlight, scanning the crowd. "Hold on just a minute, folks," he said into the microphone, his southern accent warm and friendly. He walked toward the edge of the stage, his jeweled jumpsuit glittering with each step. The crowd quieted, trying to see what had caught his attention. Elvis pointed directly at the 3rd row. "You there, honey?" The young lady with the red braids. A spotlight swiveled, landing on a girl who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. She had bright copper-colored hair woven into 2 neat braids. Her face was sprinkled with freckles. She wore a homemade t-shirt with Elvis's face drawn on it in fabric markers, surrounded by glitter and stars that were already starting to flake off. In her hands, she clutched a sign made from cardboard and markers. "Elvis, I came 2,000 miles to see you." The girl's eyes went wide, her mouth fell open. She looked left and right as if Elvis must surely be pointing at someone else. "Yes, you, darling," Elvis said with a gentle laugh. "Come on up here. Don't be shy." Two security guards in dark suits moved quickly through the crowd. They helped the girl climb over the barrier separating the audience from the stage. Her legs seemed to barely work. She stumbled slightly, and one of the guards caught her elbow. When her feet touched the stage, she stood frozen, staring up at Elvis Presley like he was made of pure light. Elvis knelt down to her level, his knees cracking slightly, a reminder that he was 49 years old, though he'd never admit it hurt. Up close, he could see that the girl was trembling from head to toe. "What's your name, darling?" Elvis asked, speaking into his microphone so everyone could hear. The girl opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her face turned bright pink. "It's okay, honey. Take your time," Elvis encouraged. "Marigold," she finally whispered. "Marigold? Now that's a beautiful name. Pretty as a flower." Elvis smiled warmly. "Where'd you come from, Marigold?" "Alaska," she said, barely audible even with the microphone nearby. Elvis's eyebrows shot up. "Alaska? Well, I'll be. That's about as far as you can get and still be in America, isn't it?" Marigold nodded, her braids bobbing. "You really came 2,000 miles to see me." Elvis gestured to her sign. Another nod. Tears were forming in the corners of her eyes, threatening to spill over. "Well, sweetheart, that might be the nicest thing anyone's done for me in a long time," Elvis said softly. He paused, studying her face. There was something in her expression, a mixture of joy and sadness, that he recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror lately. "You want to tell me something?" Elvis asked gently. "I can see you've got something on your mind, something important." The audience leaned forward in their seats. 3,000 people held their breath. Marigold looked out at the sea of faces, then back at Elvis. She stood on her tiptoes and leaned close to his ear. Her lips moved, whispering words that only Elvis could hear. Whatever she said, it lasted maybe 10 seconds. But those 10 seconds changed everything. Elvis's smile faded slowly, like someone had dimmed a light. His eyes widened. His hand, which had been resting casually on his knee, suddenly gripped tight. His jaw clenched. And then Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the man who'd performed for presidents and princesses, the man who never showed weakness on stage, began to cry. Not just a single tear rolling down his cheek. Real crying. His shoulders shook. His face crumpled. Tears streamed down both cheeks, cutting paths through his stage makeup. The audience gasped. Some people stood up, trying to see better. Others covered their mouths in shock. Elvis pulled Marigold into a tight hug, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The microphone hung forgotten in his hand. His whole body trembled. Nobody in that room understood what was happening. Nobody knew what that little girl from Alaska had whispered. But everyone knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, something raw and real and completely unrehearsed. On stage under the hot lights, Elvis Presley wept in the arms of a 12-year-old stranger. And somewhere in the third row, a man named Thomas Bennett, Marigold's father, cried too, though he didn't yet know why. Thomas Bennett wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed to be crying in public. Around him, the audience buzzed with confusion and curiosity. What had his daughter said? What could possibly make Elvis Presley break down like that? But we need to go back 2 months earlier, to understand how a 12-year-old girl from the edge of the world ended up on that stage. Back to where this story really begins. Early June 1974. Copper Ridge, Alaska. Copper Ridge wasn't the kind of place you'd find on most maps. It sat tucked between mountains and ocean, so far north that summer nights never got completely dark. The town had one main street, one grocery store, one school that taught kindergarten through 12th grade in the same building, and 347 people who all knew each other's business. Marigold Bennett lived in a small wooden house that her grandfather had built 50 years ago. The paint was peeling. The roof leaked when it rained hard. But she shared the house with her father, Thomas, and her older brother, Jasper. Thomas was a fisherman with weathered hands and a kind face lined with worry. He was 39 but looked 50. Jasper was 17, tall and lean, with the same copper-red hair as his sister. There used to be 4 of them. 3 years ago, Marigold's mother, Caroline, had gotten sick. The illness started small, just tiredness and headaches. But it grew worse. The town's only doctor, old Dr. Reeves, didn't know what was wrong. By the time they saved enough money to take Caroline to a hospital in Anchorage, it was too late. Caroline Bennett died on a rainy Tuesday in March, 2 weeks before Marigold's 9th birthday. The family had been struggling ever since. Thomas worked on fishing boats, sometimes gone for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, chasing salmon and halibut across dangerous waters. The pay was decent when the fish were running, but barely enough during the slow seasons. Jasper had dropped out of school 6 months after their mother died. He took a job at Henderson's grocery, stocking shelves and hauling boxes, bringing home $70 a week. He never complained, but sometimes Marigold caught him staring out the window with sad eyes, and she knew he was thinking about the life he'd planned. College, maybe, or at least finishing high school. As for Marigold, she did her best to keep the house running. She cooked simple meals from the cookbook her mother left behind. She did laundry in the old washing machine that only worked half the time. She swept floors and washed dishes and tried to make everything feel normal, even though nothing had felt normal since the day her mother died. But Marigold had one escape from the sadness that filled their little house: music. Specifically, Elvis Presley's music. Her mother had loved Elvis. Caroline had grown up listening to him on the radio, had even seen him perform once in Seattle before she moved to Alaska. She owned 7 of his records, which she'd played constantly, singing along while she cooked or cleaned or tucked her children into bed. After Caroline died, those records became precious treasures. Marigold played them on the old record player in the living room, handling each one like it might shatter. She knew every word to every song. She'd close her eyes and listen to Elvis's voice, and for those few minutes she could almost feel her mother in the room with her. Marigold also had her mother's transistor radio, a small silver thing that Caroline had bought as a teenager. Every night after her homework was done and the dishes were washed, Marigold would lie in bed with the radio pressed to her ear, turning the dial slowly, searching for stations from far away. Sometimes she'd catch a station from Anchorage, sometimes from Seattle or Vancouver. Once, on a clear night when the atmosphere was just right, she picked up a station all the way from California. And sometimes the very best times they'd be playing Elvis. Marigold kept a notebook beside her bed where she wrote down lyrics she heard. The notebook was nearly full, its pages covered in her careful handwriting. She decorated the margins with drawings of musical notes and guitars, and little portraits of Elvis copied from magazine pictures. Her bedroom walls were covered with Elvis pictures too. She'd cut them from old magazines at the town library, where Mrs. Chen let her take home anything that was being thrown away. Some of the pictures were yellowed and torn, but Marigold didn't care. She'd tape them up carefully, creating a collage that made her tiny room feel less lonely. Quinn O'Sullivan, the boy who lived next door, thought she was obsessed. "You know Elvis is like old, right?" Quinn had said one afternoon, standing in her doorway and staring at the walls. "He's practically ancient." "He's not ancient," Marigold had argued, "and age doesn't matter. His music is perfect." Quinn had shrugged. "I guess. I like the Beatles better." "The Beatles are good too," Marigold admitted, "but Elvis is special. When he sings, it's like he's singing just to you, you know. Like he understands exactly how you feel." Quinn hadn't understood, but Marigold didn't expect him to. Music wasn't just entertainment for her, it was survival. On particularly hard days when she missed her mother so much it felt like drowning, Marigold would put on one of those precious records and sing along. Her voice wasn't anything special, just an average 12-year-old's voice. A little thin and shaky, but when she sang, the tightness in her chest would ease. The tears would stop. For a few minutes, the world felt manageable again. Her father and brother understood. They never told her to turn the music down or put the records away. In fact, sometimes Thomas would pause in the doorway and listen, a sad smile on his face, remembering his wife. Life in Copper Ridge was hard and lonely and repetitive, but Marigold had her music. She had Elvis's voice in her ears at night. She had her mother's records and her notebook full of lyrics. It wasn't much, but it was enough. At least, it was enough until the evening of June 12, 1974, when everything changed. Marigold was lying on her bed, radio pressed to her ear, when the DJ's voice crackled through the static. And here's some exciting news for all you Elvis fans out there, the DJ announced cheerfully. The King himself will be performing a full month of shows at the Las Vegas Hilton starting August 1st. Tickets go on sale next week. If you've never seen Elvis live, folks, this is your chance. There's nobody quite like him. Marigold sat bolt upright, her heart suddenly pounding. Elvis. Live. In Las Vegas. She'd never seen Elvis perform in person. She'd never even left Alaska. The closest she'd come to seeing him was in a movie that played at Copper Ridge's tiny theater 2 years ago, a film from the 1960s where Elvis sang and drove a race car and kissed a pretty girl. But this was different. This was real. Elvis would be on a real stage, singing real songs, just a plane ride away. Marigold scrambled out of bed and ran down the hallway, her socks sliding on the wooden floor. "Dad! Jasper!" she shouted, bursting into the kitchen where her father was reading the newspaper and her brother was eating leftover stew straight from the pot. "What's wrong?" Thomas asked, alarmed by her flushed face and wild eyes. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's perfect." Marigold was breathless with excitement. "Elvis is performing in Las Vegas. In August. We could go see him. We could actually see him in person." Thomas and Jasper exchanged a look. It was the kind of look that said everything without words. The kind of look that meant, "We can barely afford groceries." The kind of look that meant, "We're $300 behind on the electric bill." The kind of look that meant, "There's no possible way." Marigold saw that look and felt her excitement deflate like a popped balloon. "Sweetheart," Thomas said gently, setting down his newspaper. "I know how much you love Elvis. I really do. But Las Vegas it's very far away and expensive. The plane tickets alone would cost more than I make in a month. Plus the hotel," Jasper added quietly, "and the concert tickets, and food and everything else. We just can't right now," Thomas continued. His voice was heavy with guilt. "I'm sorry, Marigold. I wish I could give you this. I really do. Maybe someday, when things are better." But Marigold knew what someday meant. It meant never. She nodded slowly, forcing a smile onto her face. "It's okay, Dad. I understand." She walked back to her room, closing the door quietly behind her. She sat on her bed and stared at the Elvis pictures on her walls. So close. For just a moment, seeing Elvis in person had felt possible. Real, like a dream that could actually come true. Now that dream was gone. Marigold looked at her mother's transistor radio, still sitting on the bed where she'd dropped it. She picked it up and held it against her chest. "I want to see him, Mama," she whispered to the empty room. "Just once. That's all I want." The radio crackled with static, as if trying to answer. But Marigold didn't cry. Instead, she felt something else growing inside her chest, something stubborn and determined. Her family couldn't afford to send her to Las Vegas. Fine. She'd find a way to get there herself. The next morning, Marigold woke up with a mission burning in her heart. She couldn't ask her family for money. She knew they'd give her every penny they had if they could, and that was exactly why she couldn't ask. They needed that money for food, for the leaking roof, for all the bills that kept piling up on the kitchen counter. So she'd earn it herself. Marigold pulled out a notebook, not her special Elvis notebook, but a plain one from school, and started doing math. She'd learnt about budgeting in Mrs. Patterson's class last year. Now she'd put that knowledge to use. At the top of the page she wrote, "Trip to Las Vegas." Underneath she made a list. Plane ticket from Anchorage to Las Vegas, $200. She'd heard Mr. Henderson mention flight prices once. Concert ticket, $25. She was guessing. Hotel for 2 nights, $40. Another. Food, bus to Anchorage. Total. Marigold stared at the number. $300. It might as well have been 3 million. She'd never even held a $100 bill in her entire life. She had exactly 2 months until August. That meant she needed to earn about $37 per week. It seemed impossible, but then again, so did a girl from Alaska meeting Elvis Presley. Marigold started with Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived 3 houses down. Mrs. Patterson was 74 years old and had trouble with her knees. Her house was always messy, with dishes stacked in the sink and dust covering every surface. Marigold knocked on her door that very afternoon. "Mrs. Patterson? I was wondering if you needed any help around the house. I could clean or do dishes or whatever you need. I don't charge much. Just 50 cents an hour." Mrs. Patterson peered at her through thick glasses. 50 cents? Child, that's hardly anything. Why do you need money? Marigold hesitated. If she told the truth, Mrs. Patterson might tell her father. But lying felt wrong. "I'm saving up for something special," she said carefully. "Something really important to me." Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "All right, dear. Come back Saturday morning. You can help me clean my kitchen and living room. I'll give you $3 for the afternoon." $3? Marigold's heart soared. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Thank you so much." That was just the beginning. Marigold went door to door through Copper Ridge, offering her services. She'd rake yards, pull weeds, wash windows, organize garages, anything people needed. Mr. Kowalski, who ran the town's post office, hired her to walk his 3 dogs every morning before school. $1 per day, 5 days a week. $5 every week. Guaranteed. Mrs. Chen at the library paid her $2 weekly to organize returned books and dust the shelves. The Hendersons let her sweep the floor at their grocery store after closing time. Another $2 per week. Marigold worked every spare moment she had. Before school, she walked Mr. Kowalski's dogs, Pepper, Salt, and Cinnamon, 3 energetic mutts who pulled on their leashes and barked at squirrels. After school, she'd rush to whoever needed help that day. Weekends were filled with cleaning, organizing, and any odd job she could find. Her hands grew rough from scrubbing floors. Her arms ached from carrying heavy boxes. But every time she wanted to quit, she'd think about Elvis on that stage in Las Vegas, and she'd keep going. She hid her earnings in a mason jar under her bed, buried beneath old sweaters her mother used to wear. Every few days she'd count the money, her heart beating faster with each dollar bill and coin. After 1 week, after 2 weeks, after 3 weeks, she was doing it. Slowly, painfully, but actually doing it. Quinn noticed her exhaustion one day at school. They were sitting together at lunch, and Marigold was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. "You look terrible," Quinn said bluntly. "What's going on?" "I'm just working a lot," Marigold mumbled. "Working? Doing what?" She hadn't told anyone about her plan. But Quinn was her best friend. If she couldn't trust him, who could she trust? Promise you won't tell anyone? Marigold asked. Quinn held up his hand. Promise. So Marigold told him everything about Elvis performing in Las Vegas, about her determination to get there somehow, about every job she was working, and every penny she was saving. When she finished, Quinn stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Vegas is like 1,000,000 miles away, he said, and you're 12. How are you even going to get there? You can't travel alone. I'll figure it out, Marigold said stubbornly. But even if you save enough money, your dad won't let you go by yourself. It's impossible. Nothing's impossible if you want it badly enough. Quinn shook his head, but he was smiling slightly. You're crazy, Marigold Bennett. Completely crazy. Maybe she was, but crazy was better than giving up. 4 weeks after she started saving, Marigold counted her money again. It wasn't enough, not even close, and time was running out. The concert was only 4 weeks away. She needed to work more, earn faster, but she was already working every moment she could. There weren't enough hours in the day. Marigold sat on her bed staring at the mason jar and felt tears of frustration burning in her eyes. She'd tried so hard. She'd worked until her muscles screamed and her hands blistered. But it wasn't enough. She'd never make it to Las Vegas. She'd never see Elvis. The dream was dying, and there was nothing she could do to save it. She put her face in her hands and cried silently, not wanting her father or Jasper to hear. She cried for her mother, who'd loved Elvis and would have found a way to make this happen. She cried for herself, for wanting something so badly and knowing it was slipping away. A soft knock on her door made her look up quickly, wiping her eyes. Marigold? It was Jasper's voice. Can I come in? Just a second. She shoved the mason jar back under her bed and tried to make her face look normal. Okay, come in. Jasper opened the door and sat down beside her on the bed. He was still wearing his work clothes from the grocery store, smelling faintly of cardboard and produce. For a moment, neither of them spoke. You've been working a lot lately, Jasper finally said. Dog walking, cleaning, organizing. Dad thinks you're just trying to stay busy, but I know better. Marigold's stomach dropped. You do? You're saving money for something, and I think I know what. Jasper smiled sadly. You want to see Elvis, don't you? There was no point in lying. Marigold nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I've been trying so hard, Jasper, but I only have $87. I need at least $300, and the concert is in 4 weeks. I'm not going to make it. Jasper was quiet, staring at his hands. You really love his music, don't you? He asked softly. It's not just the music, Marigold whispered. It's Mama. When I listen to Elvis, I feel close to her again. I remember her singing while she cooked dinner. I remember her dancing around the living room with you and me. The music makes her feel alive just for a little while. Jasper's eyes were shining now too. I remember that. She loved dancing. If I could see Elvis perform just once, it would be like having a piece of Mama with me. Like she'd be there too, in a way. Does that sound stupid? No, Jasper said, his voice thick. It doesn't sound stupid at all. He stood up and walked to her door, then paused. Give me a few days, he said mysteriously. Don't give up yet, okay? Before Marigold could ask what he meant, Jasper was gone, closing the door softly behind him. 3 days later, Jasper came into Marigold's room after dinner. He was holding something, a small envelope worn around the edges. I need to tell you something, he said, sitting beside her again. I've been saving money for about 2 years now. For what? A car. I was going to buy Mr. Henderson's old truck. He said he'd sell it to me for $500 once I had enough saved. Jasper paused. I've got $432. Marigold's eyes went wide. Jasper, that's amazing, you're so close. I want you to have it. The words hung in the air like something solid. What? No, Jasper, I can't. Listen to me, Jasper interrupted gently. I've been thinking about what you said, about Mama and the music and feeling close to her, and I realized something. The truck will always be there. There will always be another car I can save for, but this chance to see Elvis, that's once in a lifetime. But you've been saving for 2 years. You worked so hard. So have you. I've watched you, Marigold, walking those dogs in the rain, scrubbing floors until your hands were raw. You want this more than I've ever wanted anything. And Mama, his voice cracked. Mama would want you to go. She'd want you to have this. Tears were streaming down Marigold's face now. I can't take your car money. I can't. Yes, you can. We'll combine your $87 with my $432. That's $519. More than enough for plane tickets, hotel, concert tickets, everything. You and Dad can go together. He's been wanting to do something special for you since Mama died. This could be it. Marigold threw her arms around her brother, sobbing into his shoulder. Thank you, she choked out. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Jasper hugged her tight. When they finally pulled apart, he was crying too. But you have to promise me something, he said. Anything. When you see Elvis, you tell him something for me. Okay? You tell him, Jasper took a shaky breath. You tell him about Mama, about how much his music meant to her, about how it helped us after she was gone. Can you do that? I promise, Marigold whispered. I promise I'll tell him. That night after Jasper left, Marigold pulled out her mother's transistor radio. She held it close and whispered into the darkness. I'm going to see Elvis, Mama. I'm really going to see him. And I'm going to tell him about you. I'm going to make sure he knows how much you loved him. The radio crackled softly, and Marigold chose to believe it was her mother's way of saying she was proud. The next morning, Marigold and Jasper told their father everything. They sat at the kitchen table, the same wooden table where they'd eaten thousands of meals as a family, and explained the whole plan. Thomas listened silently, his weathered face showing surprise, then concern, then something that looked like pride mixed with sadness. You saved all that money? He asked Marigold. By yourself? She nodded. I wanted to surprise you. I didn't think I'd have enough. But then Jasper, Thomas turned to his son. You were saving for a truck. Cars can wait, Jasper said simply. This can't. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his two children, these brave, generous souls who'd grown up too fast after losing their mother. His eyes grew shiny with unshed tears. Your mother would be so proud of both of you, he said, his voice rough. I'm proud of you. So we can go? Marigold asked hopefully. You and me together? Thomas wiped his eyes quickly. I'll need to ask for time off work. Captain Morrison won't be happy about it. We're right in the middle of salmon season. But yes, sweetheart. Yes, we can go. Marigold leaped from her chair and hugged her father so hard she nearly knocked him over. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Thomas arranged to take 5 days off work, though it cost him nearly a week's pay. Marigold practiced what she'd say if she ever got the chance to meet Elvis, speaking to a bedroom mirror late at night. Quinn helped her make the sign, using his best markers and adding extra glitter that got all over both of them. Elvis, I came 2,000 miles to see you, it read in bright red letters. You think he'll notice it? Marigold asked anxiously. How could he not? Quinn replied. It's the best sign ever made in the history of signs. Mrs. Patterson gave Marigold an extra $3 as a travel bonus. Mr. Kowalski slipped her $5 and told her to buy something nice in Las Vegas. Even grumpy old Mr. Henderson contributed $2, though he pretended it was payment for extra work. The whole town seemed to know about Marigold's trip. At the grocery store, at the post office, everywhere she went, people smiled and wished her well. In a place as small as Copper Ridge, one person's joy became everyone's joy. The night before they left, Jasper gave Marigold a folded piece of paper. "Don't read this until you're on the plane," he said. "Promise?" "I promise. And remember what you promised me. Tell Elvis about Mama." "I won't forget," Marigold assured him. "I could never forget." August 14, 1974. Anchorage Airport. Marigold had never been in an airport before. The building seemed impossibly huge, filled with people rushing in every direction. Departure boards clicked and changed, showing cities she'd only read about in books: Seattle, Los Angeles, Denver, Chicago, and Las Vegas. Their flight didn't leave until noon, so they arrived early. Thomas bought them breakfast at a small cafe, scrambled eggs and toast that cost more than a whole meal would in Copper Ridge. Marigold was too nervous to eat much. "You okay, sweetheart?" Thomas asked, noticing her pale face. "I've never been on a plane before." "Neither have I, actually," Thomas smiled. "We'll figure it out together." When their flight was finally called, they joined the line of passengers walking across the tarmac toward a small propeller plane. It looked tiny and fragile, like a toy someone had scaled up to real size. Marigold's hands were shaking as she climbed the stairs. Inside, the plane was narrow with 2 seats on each side of a single aisle. Everything smelled like fuel and old upholstery. She and her father found their seats near the back. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Marigold remembered Jasper's letter. She pulled it from her pocket and carefully unfolded it. The letter was written in Jasper's neat handwriting. "Dear Marigold, if you're reading this, you're probably on the plane right now, which means we actually did it. We got you to Las Vegas. I still can't believe it. I wanted to write this down because there are things I need to tell you, and I'm not always good at saying them out loud. First, I'm so proud of you. Not just for saving all that money, but for being brave enough to go after something you wanted. Most people just dream. You actually made it happen. Second, I want to tell you about Mama and Elvis. I don't know if you remember this. You were pretty young, but Mama used to sing Elvis songs to us every single night when we were babies. Dad told me that before I was born, when Mama was pregnant with me, she'd play Elvis records and put the speaker right up to her belly. She said she wanted me to hear beautiful music before I even came into the world. When you were born, she did the same thing for you. Elvis's voice was the first music either of us ever heard. After we got older, Mama would dance around the kitchen while she cooked dinner. She'd grab our hands and spin us around, and we'd all laugh until our stomachs hurt. The happiest I ever saw her was when Elvis was playing on the radio and she was dancing with us. After she got sick, music became even more important. On the really bad days, when she was in so much pain she could barely speak, she'd ask Dad to put on Elvis records. Somehow, the music made things a little bit better. It gave her something beautiful to hold on to. The night before she died, she was very weak. The doctor had given her medicine that made her sleepy, but she called me over to her bedside and squeezed my hand. She said, "Take care of your sister. Make sure she never stops singing. Music is how we survive the hard times." I promised her I would. And I think this trip, getting you to see Elvis, this is me keeping that promise. So when you see him perform, you're not just seeing him for yourself. You're seeing him for Mama too. You're seeing him for all of us. And if you get the chance to talk to him, even for just a second, tell him thank you from our whole family. Tell him that his music kept our mother alive a little bit longer. Tell him that when she was lonely and scared, his voice made her feel less alone. Tell him that after she was gone, his songs helped her children remember her and miss her and love her. Tell him that he gave us something precious, a way to keep Mama alive in our hearts. I know Elvis probably gets letters and messages from millions of people. I know he might not understand how important this is. But try anyway, okay? Even if he doesn't remember it 5 minutes later, at least you'll have said it. At least Mama's story will have been heard. I love you, little sis. Have the most amazing time. And when you get back, I want to hear every single detail. Love. Jasper. P.S. Don't worry about me and the truck. I've already started saving again. By next summer, I'll have enough. Some things are worth the wait. Marigold read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Thomas noticed her crying and put his arm around her shoulders. You all right? She handed him the letter. As Thomas read, his expression softened, and his own eyes filled with tears. Your brother has a good heart, Thomas said quietly, folding the letter carefully and handing it back to her. I have to tell Elvis, Marigold said. I have to make sure he knows about Mama. You will, sweetheart. Somehow, you will. The plane's engines roared louder. They began rolling faster down the runway. Marigold gripped the armrests as the ground fell away beneath them, and Alaska grew smaller and smaller below. She was really doing this. She was really on her way to see Elvis Presley. The journey took all day. They changed planes in Seattle, then again in San Francisco. Each plane was bigger than the last. By the time they finally approached Las Vegas, it was after 9 o'clock at night, and Marigold was exhausted. But when she looked out the window and saw Las Vegas spread below them, her exhaustion vanished. The city glowed like a fallen constellation, millions of lights in every color imaginable. Red, blue, green, gold, formed patterns and pictures and words. Huge buildings shaped like castles and pyramids rose from the desert. Everything sparkled and shimmered and blazed. It looks like someone spilled stars on the ground, Marigold whispered in awe. Thomas smiled. Your mother would have loved to see this. The plane landed with a gentle bump. Inside the airport, everything was overwhelming. So many people, so much noise, so many bright lights and loud sounds. Slot machines dinged and chimed. People laughed and shouted. Music played from unseen speakers. They collected their single suitcase from baggage claim and took a taxi to their hotel. Thomas had found the cheapest place he could, a small motel called the Desert Rose, far from the famous strip. The building was run down with peeling pink paint and a flickering neon sign. Their room smelled musty and the carpet was stained. But it had 2 beds and a bathroom, and that was enough. Get some sleep, Thomas told Marigold. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. But Marigold couldn't sleep. She was too excited, too nervous, too overwhelmed. She lay in bed with her eyes wide open, staring at the water-stained ceiling, thinking about tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, she would see Elvis Presley in person. Tomorrow night, her dream would finally come true. She reached under her pillow where she'd tucked Jasper's letter and her mother's photograph, a small picture of Caroline smiling, taken 2 years before she died. I'm here, Mama, Marigold whispered. I made it to Las Vegas. Tomorrow, I'm going to see Elvis and I'm going to tell him all about you. I promise. Outside, the desert wind rattled the windows. Car horns honked in the distance. Someone walked past their room, laughing loudly. But inside room 11 of the Desert Rose Motel, a 12-year-old girl from Alaska finally fell asleep, dreaming of music and stages, and a man whose voice could make sadness feel a little bit lighter. Marigold woke to bright sunlight streaming through thin curtains. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then it all came rushing back. Las Vegas, the concert. Tonight. It was happening tonight. She jumped out of bed so quickly she nearly tripped over her own feet. Her father was already awake, sitting at the small table by the window, drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup. Morning, sweetheart. There's a diner next door. Thought we could get some breakfast, then explore the city a bit before the show." Marigold nodded eagerly, already pulling on her clothes. The diner was called Lucky's, and it was nothing fancy, cracked vinyl booths and a menu sticky with syrup. But the pancakes were huge and fluffy, and the waitress, whose name tag read Dolores, was kind. "First time in Vegas?" Dolores asked, refilling Thomas's coffee. "Yes, ma'am," Marigold said. "We're here to see Elvis Presley tonight." Dolores's face lit up. "Elvis? Oh honey, you're in for a treat. I've seen him perform 6 times. That man can sing like nobody's business." "You got good seats?" "Third row," Thomas said. "Third row." Dolores practically squealed. "Oh sweetie, you'll be so close you could reach out and touch him." "Not that you should," she added quickly. "Security doesn't like that. But still, third row, you lucky thing." After breakfast, they walked down the famous Las Vegas Strip. Everything was bigger and brighter than Marigold had imagined. Caesar's Palace looked like something from a history book about ancient Rome. The Flamingo was covered in pink lights. Everywhere she looked, there were fountains and statues and signs advertising shows and restaurants. Street performers juggled fire. A woman in a sparkling costume handed out flyers. A man walked past leading a tiger on a leash, and nobody seemed to think this was strange. "It's like a different planet," Marigold said, spinning around to take it all in. They couldn't afford to do much, no fancy restaurants or expensive shows, but they window shopped and watched the fountains and took pictures with Thomas's old camera. They ate hot dogs from a street cart for lunch and shared a single ice cream cone that cost a shocking 75 cents. As the afternoon wore on, Marigold grew more nervous. Her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies doing gymnastics. She kept checking the concert tickets Thomas kept in his shirt pocket, making sure they hadn't disappeared. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked as they walked back toward their motel. "What if we can't find the theater? What if they won't let us in?" "Nothing's going to go wrong," Thomas assured her. "We'll leave extra early. We have our tickets. Everything will be fine." Back at the motel, Marigold took a long shower, using the tiny soap and shampoo bottles the hotel provided. She put on her homemade Elvis t-shirt, the one she'd spent weeks making, with his face drawn in fabric markers and glitter glued around the edges. Some of the glitter had already fallen off, but she thought it still looked good. She brushed her red hair until it shined, then carefully braided it into 2 neat braids, just like her mother used to do for her. Thomas put on his one nice shirt, a blue button-down he usually saved for church. He combed his hair and even trimmed his beard a little with the scissors from his pocket knife. "How do I look?" Marigold asked, holding up her sign. Thomas's eyes got misty. "Like your mother. You look just like her when she was young." At 4 o'clock, even though the show didn't start until 8, they left the motel. They took a taxi to the Las Vegas Hilton, an enormous hotel that seemed to touch the sky. The showroom wasn't open yet, but a crowd was already forming outside. Families, couples, groups of excited women, older folks, teenagers, all kinds of people, all here to see Elvis. Marigold and Thomas joined the line. The wait was long, but Marigold didn't mind. She talked to the people around them, a grandmother from Texas who'd seen Elvis perform in 1956, a young couple on their honeymoon, a family with 3 daughters who all wore matching Elvis t-shirts. Everyone was friendly, everyone was excited, and everyone had a story about what Elvis's music meant to them. Finally, at 6:30, the doors opened. The crowd surged forward. An usher checked their tickets and pointed them toward the front of the theater. 3rd row, center section. "You folks got excellent seats." The showroom was massive. Red velvet seats stretched back into darkness. The stage was huge, with curtains closed and lights pointed at it from every angle. An orchestra pit sat in front of the stage, instruments waiting silently. Marigold and Thomas found their seats, third row, slightly to the left of center. They could see everything perfectly. "This is real," Marigold whispered, gripping the sign tightly. "This is really happening." More people filed in. The room filled with conversation and laughter and the rustle of programs being opened. Marigold's heart pounded harder with each passing minute. At 7:30 the lights dimmed slightly. The orchestra members took their places, tuning instruments and shuffling sheet music. At 7:50 the lights dimmed further. Conversations quieted to whispers. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lights went completely dark. The crowd erupted into screams and applause. The orchestra began to play a dramatic, powerful introduction that made Marigold's whole body vibrate with excitement. And then, stepping into a brilliant spotlight, wearing a white jumpsuit that sparkled like diamonds, came Elvis Presley. The screams got louder. People jumped to their feet. Camera flashes went off like lightning. Elvis grabbed the microphone, grinned that famous grin, and began to sing. His voice was even more incredible in person than on the records. It filled the entire theater, powerful and smooth and emotional. Marigold felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. This was Elvis. The real Elvis. The man whose voice had comforted her mother through illness and helped Marigold survive grief. He was right there, so close she could see his face clearly, could see him smile and move and interact with the crowd. He sang song after song, each one perfect. The audience sang along, clapped, cheered. Women threw flowers onto the stage. Elvis caught a rose and brought it to his lips, making the woman who threw it scream with delight. Marigold held up her sign as high as she could, her arms aching from the effort. But there were so many people, so many other signs. How would he ever notice hers? "Elvis, I came 2,000 miles to see you," her sign read. She willed him to look her way, to see it, to know that she was there. Song after song passed. An hour went by. Marigold's arms were shaking from holding the sign up, but she refused to lower it. Then, midway through the concert, Elvis began singing a slow ballad. His voice became soft and tender. The audience swayed, holding up lighters that flickered like stars. Elvis sang the first verse, then the chorus. Then suddenly he stopped. The orchestra continued for a few more notes, then trailed off into confused silence. Elvis was standing at the edge of the stage, his hand shielding his eyes from the spotlight, looking directly into the audience, looking directly at Marigold. "Hold on just a minute, folks," Elvis said into the microphone. Time seemed to stop. Marigold's breath caught in her throat. Elvis was pointing at her. "You there, honey? The young lady with the red braids." A spotlight swung around, blinding her. Marigold couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "Yes, you, darling," Elvis said with a warm laugh. "Come on up here, don't be shy." Strong hands helped her up, security guards in dark suits, lifting her over the barrier. Her legs didn't seem to work properly. She stumbled and one guard caught her elbow. Then her feet touched the stage, the real stage, and Elvis Presley was walking toward her, smiling, his hand extended. The crowd was roaring, but Marigold barely heard them. All she could see was Elvis, kneeling down to her level, his famous face kind and gentle. "What's your name, darling?" he asked, and she could hear his voice both from his mouth and amplified through the speakers. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her brain had stopped working. "It's okay, honey. Take your time," Elvis said patiently. "Near Marigold," she finally managed to whisper. "Marigold! Now that's a beautiful name. Pretty as a flower." Elvis's smile was warm and genuine. "Where'd you come from, Marigold?" "Alaska," she breathed. Elvis's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Alaska? Well, I'll be. That's about as far as you can get and still be in America, isn't it? She nodded, unable to form words. You really came 2,000 miles to see me. He gestured to her sign, which she was still clutching. Another nod. Tears were forming in her eyes now, threatening to spill over. Well, sweetheart, that might be the nicest thing anyone's done for me in a long time. Elvis's voice was soft, almost private, despite the microphone. He paused, studying her face with those famous eyes. You want to tell me something? He asked gently. I can see you've got something on your mind. Something important. This was it. The moment she'd traveled 2,000 miles for. The promise she'd made to Jasper. Marigold thought of her mother's smile. She thought of Jasper giving up his car. She thought of her father working his hands raw on fishing boats. She thought of every person in Copper Ridge who'd helped her get here. She stood on her tiptoes and leaned close to Elvis's ear. The theater went silent. 3,000 people held their breath, and Marigold whispered her secret, the words that had traveled with her all the way from Alaska, the message she'd promised to deliver. Marigold whispered into Elvis's ear. Her words were soft, meant only for him, but they carried the weight of love and loss and gratitude that had traveled 2,000 miles. As she spoke, Elvis's expression changed. The smile faded slowly, like a light being dimmed. His eyes widened. His hand, which had been resting casually on his knee, suddenly gripped tight. His whole body went still. Then his face crumbled. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the man who'd performed for millions, began to cry. Not just a single tear, but real, body-shaking sobs. Tears streamed down his face, cutting paths through his stage makeup. He pulled Marigold into a tight hug, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. His shoulders shook. The microphone hung forgotten in his hand. The audience gasped. Some people stood up, trying to see better. Others covered their mouths in shock. Nobody understood what was happening, but everyone knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. To understand why Marigold's words affected Elvis so deeply, we need to understand what Elvis himself was carrying that night. Behind the glittering jumpsuit and the sold-out shows, Elvis Aaron Presley was a man in pain. It was August 1974, and Elvis was 49 years old. To the world, he was still the king, still magnetic, still powerful, still capable of making thousands scream with just a smile. But inside, he was struggling. His body hurt constantly. Years of performing and poor health habits had taken their toll. His back ached. His knees protested every dance move. He took medication to sleep, medication to wake up, medication to perform, medication to calm down. Some nights, he barely recognized himself in the mirror. His marriage to Priscilla had ended in divorce the previous October. The woman he'd loved since she was 14, the mother of his only child, was gone. Now he saw his daughter Lisa Marie only occasionally. Precious visits that never lasted long enough and always left him feeling empty when she had to leave. Elvis felt lonely in a way that's hard to explain. He was surrounded by people constantly. His manager, his security team called the Memphis Mafia, his band, his backup singers, thousands of fans. Yet he felt completely, utterly alone. Nobody seemed to see him anymore. They saw Elvis Presley, the legend. They saw the jumpsuit and the mansion and the fame. But they didn't see Elvis, the man who missed his mother desperately and worried he'd wasted the gift God gave him. The worst part was the emptiness. Elvis had been performing in Las Vegas for years now. Same hotel, same stage, same songs over and over. The sparkle had faded. He felt disconnected, like he was going through the motions, performing for people who saw him as an icon rather than a real human being. Some nights he'd stand backstage before a show and ask himself why he was doing this. What was the point? He'd made all the money he could ever need. He'd achieved fame beyond imagination. But what did any of it mean? The loneliest moments were late at night in his hotel suite. The show would be over, the audience gone, his entourage dismissed. Elvis would sit alone in expensive rooms that felt cold despite their luxury, and he'd think about his mother. Gladys Presley had died 16 years earlier, in August 1958, and Elvis had never fully recovered. She'd been his best friend, his biggest supporter, his anchor. Gladys believed in him when nobody else did. She'd told him his voice was a gift meant to be shared with the world. "You sing from your soul, baby," she used to tell him. "When people hear you sing, they feel something real. Don't ever forget that. Your music can help people through their hard times." After she died, Elvis felt lost. He'd tried to honor her memory by continuing to perform, by being generous and kind. But lately he'd been wondering if he'd let her down. If she could see him now, tired, hurting, going through the motions, would she be proud or disappointed? Elvis talked to her picture sometimes, late at night when the loneliness became unbearable. "Did I do right, Mama?" he'd ask the photograph. "Did I use my gift the way you wanted, or did I waste it on money and fame and things that don't matter?" The picture never answered, of course, but the questions haunted him. On the afternoon of August 15, 1974, Elvis woke from a nap feeling particularly low. He'd been dreaming about his mother, about their old house in Tupelo, Mississippi, where they'd been so poor they could barely eat, but somehow still happy. In the dream, young Elvis was singing for his mother in their tiny living room. She was clapping and smiling, telling him he had a gift. Then the dream shifted, and he was older, famous, performing on a huge stage, but when he looked for his mother in the audience, she was gone. He woke up with tears on his face. Elvis seriously considered canceling the show that night. He didn't think he could perform feeling this heavy, this sad, this disconnected from everything, but his manager wouldn't hear of it. "The show must go on," Colonel Parker said firmly. 3,000 people bought tickets. You can't let them down. So Elvis did what he always did. He put on the white jumpsuit. He painted on a smile. He walked onto that stage carrying all his grief and exhaustion and loneliness with him, pretending everything was fine. He had no idea that a 12-year-old girl from Alaska was about to remind him why any of it mattered. Now holding Marigold close, her words still echoing in his ears, Elvis understood something he'd forgotten. His music mattered, not because it made money or won awards or filled stadiums. It mattered because it touched people's lives in real, tangible ways. It helped them survive. It gave them comfort when they were lonely. It kept them company when they felt alone. Marigold's mother, a woman he'd never met, living in a place he'd never been, had been helped by his music. His voice had made her hard days a little easier. His songs had given her children a way to remember her love after she was gone. That's what his mother had always told him. Your music can help people through their hard times. Gladys had been right all along. Elvis pulled back from the hug, wiping his eyes. Marigold was crying too, but smiling through her tears. "Thank you," Elvis whispered to her, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for telling me that, sweetheart." He stood up slowly, his knees protesting, and helped Marigold to her feet. He kept one hand on her shoulder, steadying both her and himself. The audience was silent, confused but deeply moved by what they'd witnessed. Elvis walked to the microphone stand, still holding Marigold's hand. He took a shaky breath, trying to compose himself enough to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I need to take a moment." He paused, wiping his eyes again. "This young lady just reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Something important. He looked down at Marigold with such tenderness that half the audience started crying too, even though they didn't know why. Sometimes we get so caught up in our lives, in our work, in our problems, in all the noise, that we forget why we're really here. We forget what matters most. His voice grew stronger, more certain. This little girl came 2,000 miles to tell me something. And what she told me, well, it reminded me why I sing. Why any of us do what we do. Elvis squeezed Marigold's hand gently. We're not here just to entertain. We're here to connect, to help each other through the hard times, to remind each other that we're not alone. He looked out at the audience, really seeing them for the first time that evening. Every person in this room has a story. Every person here has faced hard times and found comfort somewhere in music, in family, in friendship, in faith. His voice was steady now, full of conviction. This young lady reminded me that what we do matters, that the songs we sing, the stories we tell, the love we share, it all matters more than we know. Elvis turned back to Marigold. Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you for being brave enough to come all this way. Thank you for reminding me. He gestured to the orchestra. Gentlemen, I'd like to change up the program. Let's do something special. The orchestra leader nodded, quickly conferring with his musicians. Elvis began to sing a different song than what was planned. A slower, more emotional ballad about a child in need. He sang it with more feeling than he'd put into a performance in years, his voice rich with renewed purpose. Every word seemed to carry extra weight. Every note resonated with genuine emotion. The audience was transfixed, sensing that something had shifted, that they were witnessing not just a performance, but something profoundly real. When the song ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Elvis thanked Marigold one more time, then signaled for security to help her back to her seat. As she left the stage, still trembling, still crying, the audience gave her a standing ovation. The rest of the concert was different. Elvis performed with energy he hadn't felt in months, connecting with the audience in a way he hadn't managed in a long time. He smiled more genuinely. He talked to the crowd between songs, really talked, sharing stories and jokes and moments of real humanity. It was as if Marigold's words had woken something up inside him, reminded him that he wasn't just going through the motions, that his life and his music still had purpose and meaning. After the final song, as Elvis took his bows and the audience roared their approval, he found himself looking for Marigold in the crowd. When he spotted her red braids in the third row, he pointed at her and mouthed two words, "Thank you." She waved back, her face glowing with joy. As Elvis left the stage, for the first time in months, he felt genuinely happy. That little girl from Alaska had given him back something precious, hope that his life still mattered, that the gift his mother had told him about was still making a difference. And somewhere, Elvis chose to believe, Elvis Presley was smiling. The concert ended with a burst of fireworks and music and thunderous applause. Elvis took his final bow, blew kisses to the audience, and disappeared behind the red velvet curtain. The lights came up, and slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to file out. But Marigold couldn't move. She sat frozen in her seat, still trembling, still crying, still processing what had just happened. "Sweetheart?" Thomas touched her shoulder gently. "You okay?" She turned to look at her father, and the expression on her face was one of pure wonder, joy, mixed with disbelief, mixed with overwhelming emotion. "Dad, I talked to Elvis. I actually talked to him. And he hugged me. And he cried because of what I said." Thomas pulled his daughter into his arms. "You were so brave up there. I'm so proud of you. Your mother would be so proud." Around them, other audience members were lingering, talking excitedly about what they'd witnessed. Several people approached Marigold wanting to know what she'd said to Elvis, But she just shook her head shyly. "It was private," she said softly. "Just between me and him." They made their way toward the exit, joining the slow river of people flowing out of the showroom. Marigold clutched her sign to her chest like a treasure. She never wanted to let it go. They were almost to the door when a security guard in a black suit stepped in front of them. "Excuse me, are you Marigold Bennett?" Marigold's eyes went wide. "Yes, sir." The security guard smiled. "Mr. Presley would like to see you and your father backstage. Would you follow me, please?" For a moment, neither Marigold nor Thomas could speak. "Backstage?" Marigold finally squeaked. "To see Elvis? Again?" "Yes, miss, this way." The guard led them against the flow of people, back toward the stage, then through a side door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Suddenly, they were in a different world. Narrow hallways with concrete floors, people rushing past, carrying equipment, the buzz of voices and activity. They walked down several corridors, passing dressing rooms and storage areas. Finally, they stopped in front of a door with a gold star on it. Underneath the star, a nameplate read, "Elvis Presley." The guard knocked twice. "Come in," called a familiar voice from inside. The guard opened the door and gestured for them to enter. The dressing room was large but not fancy. Comfortable couches, mirrors surrounded by lights, racks of jumpsuits in different colors, a small refrigerator in the corner, and there, sitting on one of the couches, was Elvis. He'd changed out of his white jumpsuit into casual clothes, dark pants and a simple shirt. His hair was slightly mussed, and he'd washed off most of his stage makeup. Without all the glitter and lights, he looked more human, more real, and more tired than Marigold had noticed before. But when he saw them enter, his whole face brightened. "Marigold, come in, come in." Elvis stood up, walking toward them with his hand extended to Thomas. "You must be her daddy." Thomas shook his hand, starstruck. "Thomas Bennett, sir. I don't know what to say. Thank you for inviting us back here. Thank you for bringing her all the way from Alaska." Elvis shook Thomas's hand warmly, then turned to Marigold. "And you, young lady, come sit down. We need to talk." He led them to the couch. Marigold perched on the edge, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Elvis sat across from them, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His eyes were kind but intense, like he was really seeing them, really paying attention. "I want you to know something, Marigold. What you told me tonight about your mama, that meant more to me than you could possibly understand." "It did?" Marigold's voice was barely a whisper. "It did." Elvis nodded seriously. "I've been feeling kind of lost lately, wondering if what I do matters anymore. Wondering if singing the same songs night after night means anything to anybody." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "You reminded me that it does. You reminded me why I started singing in the first place." "Because of your mama?" Marigold asked softly. Elvis looked surprised. "You know about my mama? I read about her in a magazine. She died a long time ago, right? 16 years ago this month." Elvis's eyes grew distant. "She always told me that my voice was a gift, that I should use it to help people, to bring them joy, to make their hard days a little easier. After she passed, I tried to honor that. But lately, I'd forgotten, until tonight." He focused back on Marigold and she could see tears forming in his eyes again. "Your mama sounds like she was a special lady." "She was," Marigold said, her own tears starting to fall. "She loved you so much. She played your records all the time. When she was really sick and couldn't do much else, she'd still ask Dad to put on your music. It made her feel better, even when nothing else could." Elvis wiped his eyes quickly. "And you said she used to sing my songs to you?" Marigold nodded. "Every night before bed, and she'd dance with us in the kitchen." Those are some of my favorite memories, Mama spinning me around while you sang. That's beautiful. Elvis was quiet for a moment, lost in thought. Then he asked, "Do you still sing?" "Sometimes. When I miss her really bad, I sing the songs she loved. It makes me feel close to her again." "Good." Elvis leaned forward. "Don't ever stop singing, Marigold. Even if you never perform for anyone, even if it's just for yourself, keep singing. Music is how we keep the people we love alive in our hearts." He turned to Thomas. "You've got a remarkable daughter, Mr. Bennett. Takes real courage to do what she did tonight." "She gets it from her mother," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "Caroline was the bravest person I ever knew." Elvis stood up and walked to a closet in the corner. He pulled out several items: a scarf he'd worn during the show, a signed photograph of himself, and a small jewelry box. He handed the scarf and photo to Marigold. "These are for you, souvenirs from tonight." Then he opened the jewelry box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small music note pendant. "This is special," Elvis said, carefully taking it out. "I had it made for someone, but I think it should be yours. Every time you wear it, remember that music connects us all. Your mama, me, you, we're all connected through the songs we love." He fastened the necklace around Marigold's neck. She touched it reverently, unable to believe this was really happening. "Now," Elvis said, walking to a desk in the corner, "I have something for your brother." He pulled out a checkbook and began writing. Thomas started to protest, but Elvis held up his hand. "Please, let me do this. Your son gave up something important so his sister could be here tonight. That's real love, real sacrifice." He tore out the check and handed it to Thomas. "This is for his car. A young man who'd give up his dreams for his little sister deserves to have both dreams come true." Thomas looked at the check and his hand started shaking. "Mr. Presley, this is too much. You can and you will," Elvis said firmly but kindly. "Your family reminded me tonight why I do what I do. You gave me back something I'd lost. Hope, purpose, meaning. This is the least I can do." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to us." "I think I do." Elvis smiled. "You're good people. The world needs more families like yours." They talked for another 20 minutes. Elvis asked about life in Alaska, about fishing, about Copper Ridge. He told stories about his own childhood in Mississippi, about growing up poor but happy. He was warm and genuine, treating them like old friends rather than strangers. Finally, a man knocked on the door. Someone from Elvis's team, reminding him he had another show the next night and needed rest. Elvis walked them to the door. Before they left, he knelt down one more time to Marigold's level. "You take care of yourself, sweetheart. And remember what I said, keep singing. Your voice matters. Your story matters." He pulled her into one more hug, this one gentler, longer. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything you told me tonight. For reminding me. I won't forget you, Marigold Bennett from Alaska." "I won't forget you either," Marigold whispered back, though even as she said it, she knew it was silly. How could she ever forget this night? Elvis released her and shook Thomas's hand one final time. "You're raising her right. Her mama would be proud." As they walked back through those concrete hallways, escorted by the security guard, Marigold felt like she was floating. Her hand kept touching the music note necklace, making sure it was real, that this had all actually happened. In the taxi back to their motel, Thomas and Marigold sat in stunned silence, both processing the impossible evening they just experienced. Finally, Thomas spoke. "We need to call Jasper. He's going to want to hear about this." Back at the Desert Rose Motel, they found a payphone in the lobby. Thomas fed quarters into the slot and dialed their home number in Copper Ridge. Jasper answered on the second ring. "Hello? Jasper, it's Dad. Dad, how was the concert? Did Marigold get to see Elvis? Was it amazing?" Thomas looked at Marigold and smiled. "Son, you're not going to believe what happened. Here, I'll let your sister tell you." He handed the phone to Marigold. "Jasper." Her voice was shaking with excitement. "Hey, little sis. So, how was it?" And Marigold told him everything about being called onto the stage, about whispering her message to Elvis, about his tears, about being invited backstage, about the gifts and the necklace and the check for Jasper's car. On the other end of the line, Jasper was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You told him about Mama?" "I told him everything. Just like you asked me to. Just like I promised. And he understood. He more than understood, Jasper," he cried. Real tears. Because of what Mama meant, because of what his music meant to her. He said we reminded him why music matters. Jasper was quiet again. "Then thank you, Marigold. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for making it possible. None of this would have happened without you." They talked for a few more minutes before the quarters ran out. As Marigold hung up the phone, she felt complete somehow. She'd done what she'd set out to do. She'd delivered the message. She'd honored her mother's memory. And in doing so, she'd somehow helped Elvis too. Back in their room, exhausted but too excited to sleep, Marigold carefully placed her treasures on the nightstand, the signed photo, the scarf, and most precious of all, the music note necklace. She touched the necklace gently, thinking about everything Elvis had said. About keeping singing, about music connecting people across time and distance, about her voice mattering. Outside, Las Vegas continued its endless party, lights blazing against the desert darkness. But inside room 114, a 12-year-old girl from Alaska finally drifted off to sleep, still wearing her Elvis t-shirt, still holding her sign, dreaming of music and connection, and the magic of one impossible night. The morning sun poured through the motel curtains, waking Marigold from the deepest sleep she'd had in years. For a moment she thought the previous night had been a dream. Then she saw the signed photograph on the nightstand, the scarf draped over the chair, and felt the weight of the gold necklace still around her neck. It was real. All of it was real. Thomas was already awake, sitting at the small table and reading the check Elvis had written. He looked up when he heard Marigold stirring. "Morning, sweetheart. How'd you sleep?" "Like I was floating on clouds." Marigold sat up, touching the music note pendant. "Dad, did last night really happen?" Thomas smiled, holding up the check. "It really happened. And when we get home, your brother is going to have the money for his truck and then some." They spent their last day in Las Vegas walking around, but everything felt different now. The bright lights and loud sounds didn't overwhelm Marigold anymore. She felt confident somehow, braver. Meeting Elvis had changed something inside her. They ate lunch at a small diner, and the waitress noticed Marigold's necklace. "That's beautiful, honey. Where'd you get it?" "Elvis Presley gave it to me," Marigold said simply. The waitress laughed, thinking she was joking. "Sure he did, sweetie." Thomas pulled out the signed photograph. "Actually, he did." The waitress's eyes went wide. She called over the other waitresses, and soon Marigold was telling the whole story to a group of 5 women who listened with tears in their eyes. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," one of them said. "You're a special girl, you know that." The journey home felt shorter somehow. The planes didn't seem as scary. The airports weren't as confusing. Marigold spent most of the flight looking out the window and replaying every moment of that night in her mind, cementing each detail into her memory. When their plane finally landed in Anchorage, Jasper was waiting for them at the gate. He looked nervous and excited, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The moment he saw them, he rushed forward. Marigold dropped her bag and ran into his arms. "You did it," Jasper said, hugging her tight. "You really did it." "We did it," Marigold corrected. "This was your dream too." Thomas handed Jasper the check. Jasper stared at it, his mouth falling open. "This is Dad. This is way more than enough for the truck. This is enough to buy the truck and help with bills and maybe put some away for college," Thomas finished. "Elvis wanted you to have both your dreams, son. Not just one." Jasper's eyes filled with tears. He folded the check carefully and put it in his wallet, then pulled both his sister and father into a group hug right there in the airport. Back in Copper Ridge, news of Marigold's adventure spread through town like wildfire. Everyone wanted to hear the story. Mrs. Patterson invited them over for tea just to listen. Mr. Kowalski asked her to tell it 3 times. Even grumpy Mr. Henderson smiled when he heard about Elvis's generosity. Quinn came over the day after they returned, bursting with questions. What was he like? Was he tall? Did he smell good? What did his voice sound like up close? What exactly did you say to him? Marigold answered every question except the last one. That secret, what she'd whispered in Elvis's ear, was private, sacred, even. She'd only ever tell a few people the full story, and only when the time was right. Life slowly returned to normal. Thomas went back to fishing. Jasper bought Mr. Henderson's truck, a blue Ford that was old but reliable. He drove it proudly through town, honking at everyone he passed. With the extra money, they fixed the leaking roof. They paid off the overdue bills. They even bought new winter coats for everyone, since their old ones were falling apart. But the biggest change was in Marigold herself. She started singing more confidently, not just in her bedroom but out loud where people could hear. She joined the school choir, even though it was tiny. Mrs. Patterson heard her singing while cleaning one day and insisted she perform at the town's Christmas celebration. "You've got a gift, child," Mrs. Patterson said. "Your mama would want you to share it." Marigold wore the music note necklace every single day. When she felt shy or scared, she'd touch it and remember what Elvis had told her. Your voice matters. Your story matters. 3 months later, November, Marigold was doing homework at the kitchen table when Thomas came home from a fishing trip. He was carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. "This came for you while I was gone," he said, handing it to her. "From Memphis, Tennessee." Marigold's heart skipped. Memphis. That's where Elvis lived, at his mansion called Graceland. With shaking hands, she carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a record, a brand new Elvis album that hadn't even been released yet. With it was a handwritten note on expensive stationery with Elvis Presley embossed at the top. The note read, "Dear Marigold, I wanted you to be one of the first to hear my new album. Some of these songs I recorded after our meeting in August. You might notice they sound a little different from my older music, more personal, more emotional. That's because you reminded me to sing from my heart again, the way my mama always told me to. There's one song in particular I think you'll recognize. It's called A Mother's Love. I wrote it thinking about your mama and mine, about how their love stays with us even after they're gone. I hope it brings you comfort. Thank you again for traveling so far to see me. Thank you for your courage and your kindness. You changed my life more than you know. Keep singing, Marigold. The world needs your voice. Your friend Elvis." Marigold read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she carefully placed the record on their old player. The album began with upbeat songs that sounded like classic Elvis, but then came track 7, A Mother's Love. It was a slow, beautiful ballad. Elvis sang about a mother's gentle hands, her comforting voice, her endless patience. He sang about how a mother's love doesn't end when she passes away. It lives on in the children she raised, in the lessons she taught, in the music she shared. By the second verse, Marigold was sobbing. By the third verse, Thomas and Jasper had joined her in the kitchen, all three of them crying as they listened. When the song ended, they sat in silence for a long moment. "He wrote that for you," Jasper finally said. "For us. For Mama." Marigold nodded, unable to speak. They played the song again and again. It became their song, the one they played on hard days when they missed Caroline most. The one that reminded them she was still with them, still loving them, still watching over them. More months passed. Marigold wrote letters to Elvis, telling him about her life in Alaska, about the changes in their family, about how his music continued to help her. She didn't know if he'd ever read them, but she sent them anyway, addressing them to Graceland. To her surprise, every few months she'd receive a reply. Sometimes just a short note, sometimes a longer letter. Elvis told her about his daughter Lisa Marie, about missing his mother, about the challenges of performing and staying true to yourself. They became unlikely pen pals, the king of rock and roll and a girl from the edge of the world. In one letter, Elvis wrote, "You asked me once why I keep performing when it gets hard. I'll tell you, it's because of people like your mama. People who need music to survive the difficult times. As long as there's one person out there who needs a song to get them through the day, I'll keep singing. You reminded me of that." Marigold kept every letter in a special box under her bed, next to Jasper's letter and her mother's photograph. Spring. At school, Marigold's teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, assigned everyone to write about the most important day of their lives. Most kids wrote about birthdays or holidays, or the day their little sibling was born. Marigold wrote about August 5th. She wrote about traveling to Las Vegas, about being called onto the stage, about whispering her secret to Elvis. She wrote about his tears and his kindness, and how one moment of courage changed everything. Mr. Rodriguez read her essay twice, then called her to his desk after class. "Marigold, this is remarkable. With your permission, I'd like to share this with the whole school." Marigold hesitated. The story felt so personal, so private. "I think other kids need to hear this," Mr. Rodriguez continued gently. "They need to know that courage matters, that ordinary people can have extraordinary moments, that music and love and family are worth fighting for." Finally, Marigold nodded. "Okay, but I still won't tell exactly what I whispered to him. That part stays private." "Fair enough." The next week, Mr. Rodriguez read Marigold's essay over the school's loudspeaker during morning announcements. By the time he finished, half the teachers were crying. Afterward, kids who'd never talked to Marigold before came up to her in the hallways, telling her how brave she was, asking questions about Elvis, sharing their own stories about music and loss, and the things that kept them going. Quinn walked with her after school that day, grinning. "You're famous now," he teased. "Marigold Bennett, the girl who made Elvis cry." "I didn't make him cry," Marigold corrected. "I just reminded him of something he'd forgotten." "What?" "That we're all connected. Through music, through love, through the stories we share. That's what Mama always said, and that's what Elvis taught me." Summer. On the anniversary of their trip to Las Vegas, the Bennett family did something special. They invited the whole town to their house for a barbecue and music celebration. People brought food to share. Someone set up speakers in the yard. And all afternoon and into the evening, they played music, Elvis, of course, but also other artists. Everyone loved. People danced. Children ran around playing tag. Older folks sat in lawn chairs and tapped their feet. At sunset, Thomas stood up and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he announced, "to my late wife Caroline, who taught our children that music can heal. To my son Jasper, who sacrificed his dreams so his sister could chase hers. To my daughter, Marigold, who was brave enough to travel 2,000 miles and share our family's story with someone who needed to hear it. And to Elvis Presley, who reminded all of us that kindness and connection matter more than fame or fortune. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Then Marigold did something she'd never done before. She stood up in front of everyone and began to sing. She sang one of Elvis's songs, the one her mother used to sing to her every night. Her voice was small and shaky at first, but it grew stronger with each word. By the second verse, others were singing along. By the final chorus, the whole town was singing together under the Alaska sky. When the song ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the yard. Mrs. Patterson came up to Marigold and hugged her tight. "Your mama is so proud of you, child, I just know it." Marigold touched her music note necklace and smiled. "I know it too." That night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed, Marigold sat on her bed and wrote another letter to Elvis, telling him about the celebration, about the singing, about the way music had brought her whole community together. She ended the letter with, "Thank you for teaching me that sharing our stories is how we honor the people we love. Mama's story mattered, your music mattered, and somehow I got to be the bridge between them." That's the greatest gift anyone could ever receive. August 1977, 3 years after the concert. Marigold was 15 now, taller and more confident than the shy 12-year-old who'd traveled to Las Vegas. Her red hair hung past her shoulders instead of in braids. She was starting 10th grade in the fall and had become one of the lead singers in the school choir. Life in Copper Ridge had improved steadily over the past 3 years. Thomas's fishing business was doing better. Jasper had graduated from high school and was working full-time at the grocery store while taking correspondence courses from the University of Alaska. He still drove his blue truck everywhere, and he'd started dating a girl named Rebecca, who worked at the post office. The Bennett house had new paint, a fixed roof, and even a small addition that Thomas had built himself. A music room for Marigold with her mother's old record player and all the Elvis albums. Marigold still wore the music note necklace every single day. She'd never taken it off, not once. It had become part of her, a reminder of that magical night and everything it meant. She and Elvis had continued writing letters, though less frequently as time passed. Elvis was busy with tours and recordings. Marigold was busy with school and growing up. But they still exchanged notes a few times a year, sharing updates and encouragement. On this particular August afternoon, Marigold was in her music room, organizing her record collection and humming to herself. The window was open, letting in the cool Alaska breeze that smelled like pine trees and ocean. She heard the front door open, then footsteps running down the hall. Marigold, Jasper's voice was urgent, almost panicked. She turned, confused by his tone. "What's wrong?" Jasper appeared in the doorway, his face pale and stricken. "You need to turn on the radio right now." Something in his expression made Marigold's stomach drop. With shaking hands, she turned on her mother's old transistor radio. The announcer's somber voice filled the room. "Repeating our top story this hour, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, has died at his home in Memphis, Tennessee. He was 42 years old. Presley was found unresponsive this afternoon and pronounced dead at Baptist Memorial Hospital. The cause of death has not been officially announced, but sources say it appears to be heart-related. The radio kept talking, but Marigold couldn't hear anymore. A ringing sound filled her ears. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not right. He can't be." But the radio continued relentlessly, talking about Elvis's career, his achievements, the shock spreading across the world. Other stations were playing his music non-stop. Everyone was talking about the king's death. Marigold felt like someone had reached inside her chest and squeezed her heart. She sank onto the floor, her legs unable to hold her up. Jasper sat beside her, pulling her into his arms. "I'm so sorry, Marigold. I'm so sorry." She couldn't cry at first. She just sat there, numb and disbelieving. Elvis was gone. The man who'd held her while he cried, who'd given her the necklace she never took off, who'd written her letters and encouraged her to keep singing, he was gone. Finally, the tears came. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Thomas came home from the docks an hour later and found his children sitting together in the music room, both crying. He didn't need to ask what happened. He'd heard the news on the boat's radio. He sat down with them and the three of them mourned together, not just for Elvis the superstar, but for Elvis the person who'd touched their lives so personally. Over the next few days, the Bennett family watched the news coverage along with the rest of the world. Thousands of people lined the streets of Memphis for Elvis's funeral. Celebrities and fans alike wept openly. The whole world seemed to be in mourning. Marigold couldn't stop thinking about the last letter she'd received from Elvis just 2 months earlier. He'd written about feeling tired but hopeful, about wanting to record new music that mattered, about his love for his daughter Lisa Marie. He'd ended the letter with, "Keep shining your light, Marigold. The world needs people like you, people who understand that music and love are what make life worth living." Those were some of the last words he'd ever written to her. On the day of Elvis's funeral, Marigold went to her music room alone. She put on the album Elvis had sent her, the one with a mother's love. She sat on the floor, touching her necklace, and let the music wash over her. When A Mother's Love played, she cried for both losses, her mother and now Elvis. Two people who'd never met each other but who'd both shaped her life in profound ways. After the song ended, Marigold did something she hadn't done in a while. She sang. She sang one of Elvis's songs, her voice stronger now than it had been 3 years ago. She sang for him, for her mother, for everyone who'd ever been touched by music and needed comfort. When she finished, she felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there, heavy and real, but underneath it was something else. Gratitude. She'd gotten to meet Elvis. She'd gotten to tell him about her mother. She'd gotten to see how his music had changed her family's life. And she'd gotten to tell him that it mattered. Not everyone got that chance. Most of Elvis's millions of fans would never meet him, never tell him personally what his music meant to them. But she had. That was a gift. A precious, irreplaceable gift. 1 week after Elvis's death, a package arrived at the Bennett house, sent from Graceland. It was addressed to Marigold in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The letter was from someone named Joe Esposito, one of Elvis's closest friends and staff members. It read, "Dear Marigold, you don't know me, but Elvis talked about you many times over the past 3 years. He kept all your letters in a special box in his office. He said you reminded him why he sang, that you'd given him back something precious he'd almost lost. I'm writing because I thought you should know how important you were to him." When he was feeling low or questioning himself, he'd sometimes pull out your letters and reread them. He'd say, "There's a girl in Alaska who believes in what I do. I can't let her down." Elvis was a complicated man who struggled with many things. But he had a good heart, and he genuinely cared about the people whose lives he touched. You were one of those people. Enclosed is a photograph taken backstage after your meeting in August 1974. Elvis kept a copy on his desk. "I thought you should have the original. Thank you for being a light in his life when he needed it most. Sincerely, Joe Esposito." The photograph showed Elvis with his arm around 12-year-old Marigold, both of them smiling. But what made Marigold catch her breath was what Elvis had written on the back of the photo in his own handwriting. "Marigold from Alaska, the girl who reminded me why music matters." August 15, 1974. A night I'll never forget. Marigold held the photograph to her chest and wept. But this time, they were tears of gratitude mixed with grief. She'd mattered to him. Their meeting had meant something lasting and real. She carefully placed the photograph in a frame and put it on the shelf in her music room, next to the picture of her mother. Two people she'd loved. Two people who'd loved music. Two people who were gone, but whose influence would stay with her forever. 2 months later, Mrs. Chen, the librarian, approached Marigold with an idea. "I've been thinking," Mrs. Chen said. "A lot of people in Copper Ridge never got to hear the full story of your meeting with Elvis. Maybe it's time to share it properly. Would you willing to write it down? We could put it in the library archives, preserve it as part of our town's history." Marigold hesitated. The story still felt so personal. "You don't have to share everything," Mrs. Chen added gently. "Just what you're comfortable with. But I think it's important. Stories like yours need to be remembered." That night, Marigold sat at her desk with a blank notebook. She began to write. She wrote about saving money for the trip, about Jasper's sacrifice, about the journey to Las Vegas, about standing on that stage, terrified and excited, about whispering her secret to Elvis and watching him break down in tears. She wrote about their time backstage, about the gifts he gave her, about the letters they'd exchanged. She wrote about how one moment of courage had changed her entire life, had given her confidence, purpose, and the belief that her voice mattered. She wrote for 3 days straight, filling page after page with memories and emotions and gratitude. When she finished, she had a complete account of everything that had happened, almost everything. She still didn't write down the exact words she'd whispered to Elvis. That secret would remain private a little while longer. She gave the handwritten manuscript to Mrs. Chen, who read it with tears streaming down her face. "This is beautiful, Marigold. Truly beautiful. With your permission, I'd like to make copies and share them with people who ask about your story." "Okay," Marigold agreed. "If it helps people understand why music matters, why connection matters, then I'm happy to share it." December. At Copper Ridge's annual Christmas celebration, Marigold performed publicly for the first time since Elvis's death. She sang 3 songs, including A Mother's Love. When she finished, the entire town gave her a standing ovation. Afterward, old Mr. Henderson, who rarely said anything nice to anyone, approached her. "You've got real talent, girl. Not just the singing, but the heart behind it. That's what makes the difference." Quinn, now 17 and planning to join the Coast Guard after graduation, hugged her tight. "You're going to do something important with your music someday," he told her. "I just know it." That night, lying in bed, Marigold thought about everything that had happened since that August night in 1974. She'd lost Elvis, which hurt deeply. But she'd also gained so much confidence, purpose, a deeper understanding of how music connects people across distance and time. She touched her music note necklace, the one Elvis had given her, the one she'd worn every single day for 3 years. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, speaking to both Elvis and her mother. "Thank you for teaching me that music is how we survive, how we love, how we remember, how we keep going even when things are hard." The Alaska wind whistled outside her window. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. But in Marigold's heart she could hear music, her mother's voice, Elvis's songs, her own growing confidence as a singer. The story wasn't over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. Elvis was gone, but his music lived on. Her mother was gone, but her love lived on. And Marigold was still here, still singing, still sharing the light that both of them had helped her find. That's what music did. It connected the past to the present, the living to the dead, the hopeless to the hopeful. And Marigold Bennett, the girl from the edge of the world, would spend the rest of her life honoring that connection. Spring 1978, 8 months after Elvis's death. The music room had become Marigold's sanctuary. Every day after school she'd spend hours there, practicing songs, writing in her journal, and listening to records. The room held all her treasures: the signed photograph of Elvis, her mother's picture, the scarf from the concert, and dozens of letters she'd received over the years. One afternoon in late March, Mr. Rodriguez stopped Marigold in the hallway after class. "I have something to discuss with you," he said. "The state is holding a youth talent competition in Anchorage next month. Students from all over Alaska will perform. I think you should enter." Marigold's stomach flipped. "Me? Perform in front of that many people? You have a gift, Marigold. And more importantly, you have a story to tell through your music. People need to hear it." That evening she talked it over with her family at dinner. "I don't know if I'm good enough," she admitted, pushing food around her plate. "What if I mess up? What if people laugh?" Jasper set down his fork. "Do you remember what Elvis told you? Your voice matters. Your story matters. He believed in you, and so do we." Thomas nodded. "Your mother would want you to try. She never let fear stop her from doing what mattered." 3 days later, Marigold mailed her competition application. April. The night before the competition, Marigold couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, touching her necklace, thinking about her mother and Elvis and all the people who'd believed in her. She thought about the promise she'd made to herself after Elvis died, to honor his memory by using her voice, by sharing the connection that music created. Tomorrow, she'd do exactly that. The competition was held in a large auditorium in Anchorage. 47 students had entered, ranging from age 13 to 18. Most were from bigger towns with real music programs and professional voice teachers. Marigold was competing against trained singers who'd been preparing their whole lives. She stood backstage in her nicest dress, a simple blue one that had belonged to her mother, wearing her music note necklace and clutching her mother's photograph for luck. Other performers paced nervously, doing vocal warm-ups. A girl with perfect makeup and an expensive dress sang scales that sounded impossibly beautiful. Quinn, who'd come to support her, squeezed her shoulder. "You've got this. Just sing from your heart, like you always do." When they called her name, Marigold walked onto that stage, her legs shaking. The lights were bright, just like they'd been in Las Vegas. But this time she wasn't scared. This time she knew what to do. She'd chosen to sing a ballad, not one of Elvis's famous songs, but a mother's love, the one he'd written and sent to her. She'd gotten permission from Elvis's estate to perform it. She stepped up to the microphone, took a deep breath and began to sing. Her voice started soft and wavering, but as the song continued, it grew stronger. She thought about her mother dancing in the kitchen. She thought about Elvis crying on that stage. She thought about Jasper's sacrifice and her father's hard work and all the love that had carried her to this moment. By the final verse, she wasn't just singing the words, she was living them, feeling them, sharing them with every person in that auditorium. When the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted into applause. People stood up. Some were wiping their eyes. The judges looked at each other with raised eyebrows. Marigold walked off stage in a daze, straight into her family's arms. 2 hours later, the competition results were announced. Marigold didn't win first place. That went to a 17-year-old with operatic training. But she won second place and a special Heart of Music award for the most emotionally moving performance. More importantly, 3 different people approached her afterward with opportunities. Mrs. Anderson, who ran a youth music program in Anchorage, offered Marigold a scholarship for weekly voice lessons. Mr. Chen, a music teacher from Fairbanks, asked if she'd perform at a benefit concert for children who'd lost parents. And a newspaper reporter named Patricia Mills asked to interview her about her story. "People need to hear about your connection to Elvis," Patricia explained. "Not just the celebrity encounter, but what it meant. How music helped you through grief. How one moment of courage changed your life." Marigold agreed to all three. The newspaper article came out in June. It was titled, "Alaska Girls Meeting with Elvis, a Story of Music, Loss and Connection." Patricia had written beautifully about Marigold's journey, saving money, traveling to Las Vegas, being called onto the stage, and the lasting impact of that night. The article included the photograph of Marigold and Elvis together. The piece spread across Alaska, then to other newspapers around the country. Within weeks, Marigold received dozens of letters from strangers sharing their own stories about how music had helped them through difficult times. A woman from Texas wrote, "My husband died last year, and I didn't know how to keep living. But reading about how you and your family found comfort in music inspired me to start playing piano again. For the first time in months, I felt hope." A man from Ohio wrote, "My daughter has been depressed since her mother passed away. She won't talk to anyone, but after I read her your story, she asked me to play some of her mother's favorite songs. We cried together, and then we started healing together. Thank you." A teenager from California wrote, "I always thought my voice didn't matter because I'm not perfect. But your story taught me that heart matters more than perfection. I'm auditioning for my school musical now." Marigold kept every letter, overwhelmed by how her story was touching people she'd never met. "This is what Elvis meant," she told Jasper one evening, as they read through the letters together. "Music connects us all. When we share our stories, we help others feel less alone." Marigold started her junior year of high school while also taking voice lessons in Anchorage every Saturday. Mrs. Anderson was a patient teacher who helped Marigold develop her natural talent. "You have something special," Mrs. Anderson told her after one lesson. "Not just a good voice, but authenticity. When you sing, people believe you. That's rarer than technical perfection." In November, Marigold performed at the benefit concert for grieving children in Fairbanks. She sang 3 songs, including A Mother's Love, and afterwards spent time talking with kids who'd lost parents. A 7-year-old boy named Marcus hugged her and said, "My daddy died, but listening to you sing made me remember the good times instead of just the sad times." That moment crystallized everything for Marigold. This was her purpose, using music to help others heal, just like Elvis's music had helped her family. December. At Copper Ridge's Christmas celebration, Marigold organized something new. A community sharing circle where people could talk about loved ones they'd lost and the music that helped them remember. Mrs. Patterson talked about her late husband and how they danced to big band music. Mr. Kowalski shared that his son had died in Vietnam, and listening to folk songs helped him feel connected. Even grumpy Mr. Henderson opened up, revealing that his sister had passed away when they were children, and her favorite lullaby still brought him comfort. After everyone shared, they sang together, a mix of old songs, new songs, hymns, and pop music. The whole town, united through music and shared stories. "Your mother started something special," Thomas told Marigold that night, "and you're carrying it forward." Spring. Quinn graduated from high school and prepared to join the Coast Guard. Before he left Copper Ridge, he and Marigold sat on the dock, watching the water. "You're going to do amazing things," Quinn told her. "I can feel it. You're going to travel beyond Alaska, share your music with the world, help thousands of people." "Maybe," Marigold said, "but even if I only help one person, that's enough. That's what I learned from Elvis. You don't have to be famous to make a difference. You just have to be authentic and brave enough to share your story." Quinn smiled. When did you get so wise? The night I stood on a stage in Las Vegas and whispered a secret to the king of rock and roll. They both laughed, then sat in comfortable silence, listening to the water lap against the dock. Summer. Marigold received an invitation that took her breath away. The Elvis Presley estate was organizing a memorial concert in Memphis on the 2nd anniversary of his death. They wanted Marigold to attend as a special guest, and if she was willing to share her story and perform. The letter came from Priscilla Presley herself. Dear Marigold, Joe Esposito told me about you and showed me some of Elvis's letters to you. I know how much your meeting meant to him. He kept your photograph on his desk until the day he died. We're organizing a memorial concert to celebrate Elvis's life and music. We'd be honored if you'd participate. Your story represents the best of what Elvis stood for: connection, kindness, and the healing power of music. Please let us know if you can join us. Warmly, Priscilla Presley. Marigold read the letter 5 times, her hands shaking. I have to go, she told her father. I have to honor Elvis's memory. Thomas nodded. Then we'll make it happen. This time the family had enough money saved. Thomas, Jasper, and Marigold would all travel to Memphis together, a family trip to honor the man who'd changed their lives. August 16, 1979, Memphis, Tennessee. Graceland was even more impressive than Marigold had imagined. The white columns, the beautiful grounds, the sense of history and importance. But what moved her most was the simple grave marker where Elvis was buried, next to his mother Gladys. Marigold knelt beside it, touching her necklace. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me that night. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reminding me that my voice matters. I'm trying to honor your memory by helping others the way you helped me. That evening, the memorial concert was held at an outdoor venue. Thousands of people gathered, fans from around the world, celebrities, musicians, and people whose lives Elvis had touched. When it was Marigold's turn to speak, she walked onto the stage, another moment of courage, and looked out at the sea of faces. My name is Marigold Bennett, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. 5 years ago, when I was 12 years old, Elvis Presley invited me onto his stage in Las Vegas. What happened next changed my life forever. She told the story carefully, emotionally, authentically. She talked about her mother's love of Elvis's music, about Jasper's sacrifice, about standing on that stage and delivering a message that made Elvis cry. Elvis reminded me that night that music connects us all, Marigold said, her voice growing stronger. That when we share our stories, our grief, our joy, our struggles, we help each other heal. He taught me that every voice matters, not just the famous ones. That courage means being vulnerable enough to let people see your true heart. Then she sang. She sang A Mother's Love, the song Elvis had written after their meeting. She sang it for Elvis, for Gladys, for her own mother Caroline, and for everyone in that audience who'd ever lost someone they loved. When she finished, the audience was silent for a long moment. Then they rose to their feet, applauding and crying, understanding that they'd witnessed something special, not just a performance, but a testament to Elvis's lasting impact. After the concert, dozens of people approached Marigold with their own stories, a woman whose life Elvis had saved with a generous donation. A man who'd been in the audience the night Marigold met Elvis. A girl Marigold's age who'd started singing because Elvis's music helped her through her parents' divorce. Each story was different, but they all shared the same theme. Elvis's music and kindness had rippled outward, touching lives in ways big and small, creating connections that lasted beyond his death. That night, back at their hotel, Marigold sat with her father and brother. I understand now, she said quietly, what Elvis meant about music being a gift. It's not about being perfect or famous. It's about being brave enough to share what's in your heart, knowing it might help someone else feel less alone. Thomas hugged his daughter tight. "You're doing exactly what your mother would have wanted. You're spreading light." And Marigold realized that was true. She was honoring both Caroline and Elvis, two people who'd understood that music wasn't just entertainment, but survival, connection, love. The ripple effect continued, spreading outward in ways she couldn't fully see yet, touching lives she'd never meet, creating connections that would last for generations. Present day. Decades later, Marigold Bennett stood at the window of her small classroom in Anchorage, watching snow fall gently onto the parking lot. Her red hair, now streaked with silver, was pulled back in a loose bun. She was 62 years old, but her eyes still sparkled with the same warmth they'd held when she was 12. The classroom walls were covered with musical notes, inspirational quotes, and photographs. In the place of honor hung the picture of her with Elvis, both of them smiling, his arm around her young shoulders. Next to it was a photo of her mother, Caroline, and another of Jasper, who'd passed away 5 years earlier from cancer. Marigold was a music teacher now, just as she'd been for the past 30 years. She taught middle school students, kids who were awkward and uncertain and trying to find their voices, just like she'd once been. Every year, hundreds of children passed through her classroom. She taught them scales and rhythm and proper breathing technique. But more importantly, she taught them that music mattered, that their stories mattered, that authenticity was more valuable than perfection. Her students loved her. Former students, now adults with families of their own, still wrote to her, telling her how she'd changed their lives. Some had become professional musicians. Others simply sang to their own children at bedtime. But all of them carried forward the lesson she'd taught. Music is how we connect, how we heal, how we survive. The bell rang, startling Marigold from her thoughts. Students began filing in for her last class of the day. 8th graders, 13 and 14 years old, at that difficult age where everything feels too big and too scary. Among them was a girl named Luna Rodriguez, who'd been particularly quiet lately. Luna had lost her father 3 months ago in a fishing accident. Since then she'd barely spoken, barely participated, barely seemed present. Marigold understood that kind of grief all too well. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marigold said warmly as students settled into their seats. "Today I want to try something different. Instead of our regular lesson, I want to talk about why music matters, why we sing even when things are hard, why sharing our stories through music can help us heal." Some students perked up, interested. Others looked skeptical. "I'm going to tell you a story," Marigold continued. "It's about a 12-year-old girl who lost her mother and felt like she'd never be happy again. But then she discovered that music, her mother's favorite songs, helped her feel connected to her mom even after she was gone. She had their attention now. Even the boys in the back, who usually disrupted class, were listening." Marigold told them her story. Not the shortened version she usually shared, but the full account. She told them about saving every penny, about Jasper's sacrifice, about the journey to Las Vegas. She described standing on that stage, terrified and overwhelmed, next to Elvis Presley himself. "And then he asked me if I wanted to tell him something," Marigold said softly. "He could see I had a message I'd traveled 2,000 miles to deliver." The students leaned forward. They'd heard bits of this story before. Everyone in Alaska knew about their music teacher's connection to Elvis, but she'd never told them everything. "What did you say to him?" a boy named Marcus asked. "Everyone always wonders, but you never tell," Marigold smiled. "You're right. I've kept that secret for a long time, but I think maybe it's time to share it fully, because the secret isn't just about me and Elvis. It's about all of us, about what music means and why it matters." She walked to her desk and pulled out an old, worn photograph, the one of her mother, Caroline, smiling at the camera 2 years before she died. "This is my mother. Her name was Caroline. She loved Elvis Presley more than any other singer. His music got her through hard times. When she was lonely or scared or in pain, his voice made her feel less alone." Marigold's voice grew thick with emotion, but she continued. "Before my mother died, she told my brother Jasper something important. She said, 'If Marigold ever gets to meet Elvis, tell her to give him a message for me.'" The classroom was completely silent now. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. So that night in Las Vegas, when Elvis asked me what I wanted to tell him, I leaned close and I whispered this. Marigold took a deep breath, preparing to share the words she'd kept private for so many years. Flashback to August 15, 1970. Young Marigold stood on tiptoes, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Elvis Presley knelt beside her, his famous face kind and patient, waiting to hear what she'd traveled so far to say. She leaned close to his ear and began to whisper. "My mama died 3 years ago," she said, her voice trembling. "Before she died, she told my brother something. She said, 'Tell Elvis that his music kept me alive when I wanted to give up. Tell him that when I was lonely, his voice made me feel less alone. Tell him that when I'm gone, his songs will help my children remember me.' And that's the greatest gift anyone could give." Marigold paused, tears streaming down her face. "She was right, Mr. Presley. When I miss her so much I can't breathe, I listen to your songs and I feel her with me again. You gave me my mama back even after she's gone." She pulled back slightly, looking directly into Elvis's eyes. "But there's something else. My mama wanted me to tell you something about yourself too." Elvis's expression shifted, becoming even more attentive. She said, "Tell Elvis that he's not just a singer. He's a light in the darkness for people like me. He's proof that beauty and joy still exist, even when life is hard. Tell him that when he doubts himself or feels alone, he should remember that somewhere out there, people like me are surviving because of him." Marigold's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "My mama said, tell him his life matters. Tell him his mother, Gladys, is proud of him. Tell him that the gift God gave him, his voice, his kindness, his heart, he's used it exactly the way he was supposed to. Tell him not to give up, because the world still needs his light." That's when Elvis broke down. Because Marigold had delivered exactly the message he needed to hear at exactly the moment he needed to hear it. She'd reminded him that his life had purpose, that his mother's belief in him had been right, that even on his worst days, even when he felt empty and lost and alone, he was making a difference in ways he couldn't fully see. Marigold had been a messenger, carrying her mother's words and wisdom across 2,000 miles to reach a man who desperately needed to hear them. Present day, Marigold's classroom. Marigold finished speaking, and for a long moment, no one moved. Several students were crying. Others sat with wide eyes, processing what they'd heard. Luna Rodriguez, the quiet girl who'd lost her father, raised her hand slowly. "Yes, Luna," Marigold said gently. "Did it help him? Did what you said make things better for Elvis?" Marigold considered the question carefully. "I don't know if it fixed everything." Elvis still struggled. He still faced hard times, but he wrote me letters afterward, and in them he said that night reminded him why his music mattered. He said I'd given him back something precious, hope that his life meant something. She paused. 3 years later, when Elvis died, I wondered if I should have said more, done more. But then I realized I did what my mother asked me to do. I delivered her message. I shared our story, and for one night, maybe longer, Elvis felt less alone. Marcus, the boy who'd asked about the secret, spoke up. "Your mom was really wise. She knew Elvis needed to hear that." "She was wise," Marigold agreed. She understood something important, that we all need to be reminded that our lives matter, that we're not alone, that the gifts we've been given are meant to be shared. Luna raised her hand again, and when Marigold nodded, she said in a quiet voice, "My dad used to sing to me every night before bed. Since he died, I haven't wanted to listen to music at all. It hurts too much." Marigold walked over and knelt beside Luna's desk, just as Elvis had once knelt beside her. "I understand that hurt," Marigold said softly. "After my mother died, I felt the same way. But eventually, I realized that music didn't cause the pain. It just reminded me of the love. And that love is worth remembering, even when it hurts." Luna's eyes filled with tears. "But what if I forget what his voice sounded like?" "You won't forget. Love doesn't work that way. And if you start singing the songs he loved, you'll feel him with you again, just like I feel my mother when I sing." Luna nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. Marigold stood and addressed the whole class. "Here's what I want you to understand. You don't have to meet someone famous to make a difference. You don't have to have a perfect voice or a tragic story. You just have to be willing to share what's in your heart." She touched her music note necklace, the one Elvis had given her 50 years ago, the one she still wore every single day. "My mother shared her message through me. I shared it with Elvis. Elvis shared his music with millions. And now I'm sharing this story with you." That's how light spreads. One person at a time. One story at a time. A girl named Emma raised her hand. "Miss Bennett, what should we do with our stories? How do we share them?" Marigold smiled. "However feels right to you. Some of you will sing. Some will write. Some will simply listen to others with compassion and make them feel less alone. There's no wrong way to spread light." The bell rang, signaling the end of class and the end of the school day, but no one moved. The students sat there, reluctant to leave, sensing they'd experienced something important. Finally, slowly, they began gathering their things. As they filed out, many stopped to thank Marigold. Some hugged her. Luna lingered longest. "Miss Bennett?" Luna said quietly, "Could you teach me one of the songs your mom loved? I think I'm ready to sing again." Marigold felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'd be honored." After all the students left, Marigold sat alone in her classroom, looking at the photographs on the wall. Her mother, Elvis, Jasper, Quinn, who'd retired from the Coast Guard and now lived in Seattle, Thomas, who'd passed peacefully in his sleep 10 years ago. So many people she'd loved and lost. So many connections that had shaped her life. She thought about the ripple effect, how her mother's love had led to Elvis's tears, which had led to changed perspectives, which had led to this classroom full of students learning that their voices mattered. Caroline Bennett had never met Elvis Presley. She died in a small house in Alaska, probably never imagining that her words would one day reach the king of rock and roll. But they had. Through Marigold, through courage, through the mysterious ways that love and music connect people across time and distance. And now, 50 years later, Caroline's wisdom was still spreading through Marigold's teaching, through her students, through Luna Rodriguez, who would go home tonight and sing one of her father's favorite songs and feel him close again. That was the secret Marigold had whispered to Elvis. Not just words about her mother's love, but a profound truth about human connection. We save each other. Through our stories, our music, our willingness to be vulnerable and authentic, we remind each other that life has meaning, that we're not alone, that our existence matters. Elvis had saved Caroline with his music. Caroline had saved Elvis with her message. Elvis had saved Marigold with his kindness. And Marigold was saving her students, one lesson at a time. The circle continued, unbroken, rippling outward into a future she'd never fully see but could trust was bright. Marigold stood, turned off the classroom lights, and walked toward the door. But before leaving, she looked back one more time at the photograph of 12-year-old her with Elvis. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening, for crying, for reminding me that my voice mattered. I've tried to honor that gift every day since." Then she smiled, touched her necklace one more time, and walked out into the snowy evening, ready to go home and prepare tomorrow's lesson. Because there were always more students who needed to hear that their stories mattered, that their voices counted, that music could heal what seemed irreparably broken. And Marigold Bennett, the girl from the edge of the world who'd once whispered a secret to the king of rock and roll, would spend the rest of her days making sure they understood. 6 months later, January, the snow fell heavily outside Marigold's classroom windows, creating a white curtain that made the world feel quiet and peaceful. Inside, her afternoon class was just beginning. Luna Rodriguez sat in the front row now instead of hiding in the back. Over the past few months, she'd slowly come back to life, finding comfort in the songs her father had loved. Today was special. Marigold had invited several former students to come speak to her current class about how music had shaped their lives. It was part of a project she called Stories That Connect Us. The first speaker was a woman in her 30s named Sarah Chen, who'd been Marigold's student 15 years ago. "Ms. Bennett taught me something I'll never forget," Sarah told the 8th graders. "She taught me that you don't have to be perfect to share your gift. I was so scared of making mistakes that I almost gave up on music entirely. But Ms. Bennett told me about her own fears, about being terrified on that stage with Elvis, about her voice shaking, about feeling like she wasn't good enough." Sarah smiled at Marigold. "She taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the important thing even when you're scared. Now I'm a music therapist. I work with kids in hospitals, helping them process pain and fear through songs. I do that because Ms. Bennett showed me that music is medicine." The next speaker was a man named David Ogunwe, now a successful songwriter in Nashville. "I grew up in foster care," David said quietly. "I moved from house to house, never feeling like I belonged anywhere, but in Ms. Bennett's class I found my voice, literally. She encouraged me to write songs about my experiences. She told me that my story mattered, even though I was just a kid with no family." He pulled out his phone and showed the students a gold record mounted on his wall. "That's for a song I wrote called Finding Home. It's been streamed over 50 million times. But none of that would have happened if Ms. Bennett hadn't believed in me first." 5 more former students spoke, each sharing how Marigold's teaching had changed their trajectory. Some had become musicians, others were teachers, therapists, parents who sang to their children, but all of them carried forward the lesson about connection, authenticity, and the healing power of music. After the speakers left, Emma, the girl who'd asked how to share her story, raised her hand. "Miss Bennett, you've helped so many people. But what about you? Are you still healing? Do you still miss your mom and Elvis and everyone you lost?" It was a brave question, the kind that cut straight to the heart. Marigold considered it carefully. "Yes, I still miss them. Every single day. But here's what I've learned. Grief and joy can exist together. I can miss my mother and still feel grateful for the time we had. I can be sad that Elvis is gone and still celebrate what his music gave to the world." She walked to the window, looking out at the falling snow. Healing isn't about forgetting or moving on. It's about learning to carry your losses with grace. It's about transforming pain into purpose. Luna spoke up, her voice stronger than it had been months ago. "Is that why you teach? To transform your pain into purpose?" "Yes," Marigold said simply. "Every time I help a student find their voice, I honor my mother's memory. Every time I encourage someone to be brave, I honor Elvis's legacy. They're gone, but their influence lives on through me and through all of you. March. Marigold received an unexpected phone call from a documentary filmmaker named Rachel Martinez. "I'm creating a film about Elvis Presley's impact on ordinary people's lives," Rachel explained. "Not the usual documentary about his fame and music, but about the personal connections he made. Your story is exactly what I'm looking for. Would you be willing to participate?" Marigold hesitated. She'd spent 50 years sharing her story in classrooms and small venues, but a documentary would reach millions of people. "I need to think about it," she told Rachel. That evening, she sat in her small apartment, filled with photographs, letters, and mementos from a lifetime of teaching, and thought about what her mother and Elvis would want. Caroline had believed in sharing stories, in connection, in light spreading from person to person. Elvis had encouraged Marigold to use her voice, to be brave, to help others feel less alone. The answer was clear. She called Rachel back the next morning. "I'll do it, but I want to make sure the focus stays on the message that we all have the power to make a difference in someone's life, famous or not." "That's exactly the story I want to tell," Rachel assured her. Summit. The film crew arrived in Anchorage in June. They spent 3 days filming Marigold in her classroom, at home with her photo albums, and at the small music center where she volunteered on weekends. Rachel interviewed dozens of Marigold's former students, documenting how her teaching had rippled outward, affecting hundreds of lives. She also spoke with people who'd heard Marigold's story over the years and been inspired to share their own stories of loss and healing. The most emotional moment came when Rachel asked Marigold to visit her father's grave. Thomas had been buried next to Caroline in the small cemetery in Copper Ridge. Marigold knelt between the two headstones, touching each one gently. "Hi, Mama. Hi, Dad," she said softly, aware of the camera but not caring. "I'm doing what you taught me. I'm spreading light. I'm helping people understand that love doesn't end. It just changes form." She looked directly at the camera. "That's what I want people to know. The ones we love never really leave us. They live on in the kindness we show others, in the stories we share, in the music we create together." August 2025, 50th anniversary. August 15, 2025, marked exactly 50 years since Marigold had met Elvis on that stage in Las Vegas. The documentary, titled A Whispered Secret: How One Girl Reminded the King Why Music Matters, was scheduled to premiere that evening on a major streaming platform. Marigold hosted a viewing party in Copper Ridge, inviting the entire town. They gathered in the community center, the same building where she'd sung for the first time after her mother's death, where she'd performed at countless Christmas celebrations, where so many moments of her life had unfolded. Quinn flew in from Seattle, now 73 but still strong and healthy. Former students came from around Alaska and beyond. Luna Rodriguez was there with her mother, both of them smiling. As the documentary began playing on a large screen, Marigold felt a wave of emotion. There was 12-year-old her on that stage, red braids and homemade t-shirt, whispering into Elvis's ear. There were the tears streaming down Elvis's face. There was the moment that had changed everything. The documentary included interviews with people who'd been at that concert, who remembered witnessing something profound even though they didn't know what had been said. It showed letters between Marigold and Elvis, read aloud by actors. It featured Joe Esposito explaining how Elvis had kept Marigold's photograph on his desk as a reminder of why his work mattered. But more importantly, the film showed what had happened after, how Marigold had taken that experience and transformed it into a lifetime of service, teaching hundreds of children that their voices mattered, that music could heal, that authentic connection was more valuable than perfection. Near the end of the documentary, present-day Marigold appeared on screen, silver hair gleaming, music note necklace visible at her throat. What my mother understood and what Elvis understood is that we're all connected. she said to the camera. Every act of kindness, every song shared, every story told, it all ripples outward in ways we can't fully predict. My mother touched Elvis without ever meeting him. Elvis touched millions without knowing most of their names, and every single one of us has that same power. She leaned forward, speaking directly to whoever might be watching. You don't have to be famous to make a difference. You don't have to have a perfect voice or a dramatic story. You just have to be willing to share what's in your heart. That's how we save each other. That's how light spreads. The documentary ended with footage of Marigold's classroom, showing students of all backgrounds and abilities singing together, their voices blending into something beautiful and hopeful. When the screen went dark, the community center erupted in applause. People stood, many wiping tears from their eyes. Marigold walked to the front of the room, overwhelmed by the response. "Thank you all for being part of this journey," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "For 50 years you've supported me, believed in me, and helped me honor the memory of my mother and Elvis. But this story isn't just about me. It's about all of us, about how we lift each other up, how we help each other through hard times, how we keep love alive through the stories we tell and the songs we sing." Luna Rodriguez stood up. "Ms. Bennett, you taught me that it's okay to sing again after loss. You taught me that my father's memory doesn't hurt less when I honor it. I just learned to carry it with more grace. Thank you." Others began standing, sharing their own testimonies. A man who'd been suicidal until Marigold's story inspired him to seek help. A woman who'd reconnected with her estranged daughter after learning about forgiveness and family bonds. A teenager who'd found the courage to come out to his parents after hearing that authenticity matters more than perfection. Story after story, person after person, each one a testament to how far the ripples had spread. Later that night, after everyone left, Marigold walked alone through the quiet streets of Copper Ridge. The town had changed in 50 years. New buildings, new families, new technologies, but the essence remained the same. It was still a small community where people knew each other, cared for each other, and showed up when it mattered. She found herself at the old dock where she used to sit with Quinn, watching the water and dreaming of adventures beyond Alaska. The midnight sun gave everything a soft, eternal twilight glow. Marigold sat on the worn wooden planks, her feet dangling over the edge, and thought about the journey her life had taken. From a heartbroken 12-year-old saving pennies to a woman who'd touched thousands of lives through teaching. From a girl too shy to speak to someone who'd learned that her voice mattered. She thought about her mother, who'd never know how far her wisdom had traveled. She thought about Jasper, who'd sacrificed his dream so she could chase hers. She thought about her father, who'd worked his hands raw to give his children a better life. She thought about Elvis, who'd cried real tears and reminded her that fame doesn't protect you from loneliness or pain. All of them were gone now, but none of them were truly lost. They lived on in her, in every lesson she taught, every student she encouraged, every person she helped find their voice. Marigold touched her music note necklace, the gold worn smooth from 50 years of constant wear. "I hope I made you proud," she whispered to the stars, to the memory of everyone she'd loved and lost. "I hope I used the gift well." The water lapped gently against the dock pilings. A bird called in the distance, and in that moment of perfect stillness, Marigold felt something she hadn't felt in years: complete peace. She'd done what she'd set out to do. She'd delivered her mother's message. She'd honored Elvis's memory. She'd transformed her pain into purpose and her grief into grace. The story that had begun 50 years ago on a stage in Las Vegas hadn't ended. It would never end. It would continue rippling outward through her students, their students, and everyone who heard the message and chose to share their own light. That was the true legacy. Not fame or recognition, but connection. Not perfection, but authenticity. not taking from the world but giving back with open hands and an open heart. Marigold stood, brushed off her pants and walked back toward her small apartment. Tomorrow she'd wake up and teach another class. She'd encourage another shy student to find their voice. She'd share another story about why music matters. And somewhere, in ways she'd never fully see, the ripples would continue spreading, carrying forward the love of a mother who died too young, the kindness of a king who'd cried on stage, and the courage of a girl who'd traveled 2,000 miles to whisper a secret that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know, where are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if Marigold's courage inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. When you subscribe, you help us spread more stories of kindness and connection to people who need them. Your support means we can keep sharing tales that remind us we're all connected through love, music, and the brave choices we make. Right now, another incredible story is appearing on your screen. Click on it to continue your journey with us. Thank you for being here, and remember, your voice matters, your story matters, and you have the power to make someone's day a little brighter. See you in the next story.